now we come to the final of this morning's three plenary lectures, where Peter Wyse Jackson, the president of Missouri Botanical Garden, who I think is known to all of us, and I would say probably the person who has done most for the Botanic Garden community to shape agendas from the International Agenda for Botanic Gardens, but moving on through a central role in the development of the global strategy for plant conservation, and in particular, I think, for his chairmanship of the Global Partnership for Plant Conservation, which has been the body that enables botanic gardens to continue to push forward with the global strategy. So somebody with an outstanding contribution and achievement behind him, and a very great pleasure to invite you to welcome Peter Wyse Jackson.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to begin by thanking Alan Matchett and the Dunedin Botanic Garden team for the outstanding job that they've done in presenting the Congress for us, and also to Sarah Oldfield and BGCI for the wonderful work they've done in bringing us all here. I was delighted and very honored to be given the opportunity to present this morning under the title Celebrating Botanic Gardens, Past Successes and Future Challenges. When I looked in preparing this talk during the week, when listening to all of you, I really came to the conclusion that we have a lot to celebrate. There have been wonderful successes, but in some ways the successes that we have achieved have pointed up the way that we have very significant future challenges that we must address. So what I want to do in my presentation is point out some of the achievements and successes over the last few decades, and then pull from what you have said and from some of my own thoughts what are some of the upcoming key priorities, some of the opportunities we have, and some of the most important tasks and challenges in the years ahead. There has been a remarkable growth, however, in the number and diversity and distribution of botanic gardens worldwide over the last 30 years. In 1983, the International Directory of Botanic Gardens included just under 800 botanic gardens. Today, if you go onto the plant search, there are more than 3,100 botanic gardens listed, we are in a period of unprecedented growth and development of botanic gardens and their role. I know that the majority of the world's botanic gardens are in Europe, in North America, but I think we can be very encouraged that many of the new botanic gardens over the last few decades have been created in parts of the world which are very rich in plant diversity. For example, in South America, there are almost 200 botanic gardens now. In Central America, there are a significant number. I think we need to look at some areas where there are still very few botanic gardens, and those that do exist are very poorly supported and poorly resourced, and most notably in Africa and in the Middle East. But we can celebrate the fact that we have a very substantial body of botanic gardens now able to work together to deliver so many of the future challenges. It's also, when you look at the countries and territories around the world that still have no botanic gardens, as I said, there are perhaps 20 countries in Africa where there is no botanic garden. The same, smaller number, perhaps 5 or 6 countries in the Middle East. And many of the other territories or countries that have no botanic gardens yet are quite small ones, particularly on islands. We are supported in our work in botanic gardens by the fact that we have now a more or less complete world network of botanic gardens operating at the international, regional, and national, and indeed in many cases local levels too. Most of the organizations that I've included on my slide have been created within the last 25 years. And they were created because there was a need for botanic gardens to collaborate, to develop shared agendas and support each other for moving forward. And so we can celebrate that we have a very strong and very clear network for our work in botanic gardens, which is connected at all levels, particularly through events such as this Congress. We can also celebrate the fact that the roles of botanic gardens have changed very fundamentally since the 1980s. From roles before the 1980s in science and research, in management of living collections, in obviously public amenity, providing space for citizens to relax and enjoy the open air and the plants, some limited education activities, and great collections of exotic plants. But today, when we look at the roles of botanic gardens, they have extended into many, many more areas and refined and improved the emphasis and the work that they had traditionally done for several centuries into functioning as multi-purpose botanical resource centers, serving their communities, serving their cities, serving their countries, and indeed serving the world. And so I believe it's been a remarkable reinvention of botanic gardens over the last 3 decades that we can celebrate. I think one should also realize that this hasn't happened by accident. It really has been a very influential role played and continuing by BGCI, helping with development of policies, bringing people together, providing technical assistance, a whole range of projects in different countries. And certainly we can celebrate 26 years of remarkable achievement by BGCI as our network organization. For me, one of the highlights of the networking are these congresses. They began this series in 1985, when in Gran Canaria in Spain, the first International Botanic Gardens Conservation Congress was held, which led to the establishment of BGCI. And then, since then, these congresses have been held every 3 years. After the 5th one, the title was changed and the focus was changed to become the Global Botanic Gardens Congress. And of course, here we are celebrating the 5th of those congresses, but in fact, the 10th in the series. The BGCI role has also been hugely influential in helping to grow and to shape education in botanic gardens. I remember years ago asking a botanic garden director in the Caribbean if they had an education program. And he said, "Oh yes, we have. We've got labels. Is that what you mean?" And we now can laugh at that because we know how deep the educational role of botanic garden goes, and that has been certainly supported and shaped by BGCI. And that role has also been supported by the fact that every 3 years BGCI has organized the International Botanic Gardens Education Congresses, of which 8 have been held to date. The last one was in Mexico last year, and the advertisement is that the next one will be in St. Louis, hosted by the Missouri Botanical Garden in April next 2015. So I hope that you will come and join us for that Congress in a year and a half from now. Oh my goodness, is it only a year and a half? But it is worth looking at what seems to have been the main drivers for the development of botanic gardens over the last few decades. It hasn't happened by accident. And I think my view is that the main reason why new botanic gardens have been created is because of the need for them as vital resources to address environmental issues, environmental education, biodiversity conservation. It is true that many existing botanic gardens have been converted to become botanic for various reasons, and it has to be admitted for those reasons include for prestige reasons, that people who have a private or a public display garden get a new cachet from them becoming botanic gardens. But it has also been a recognition that botanic gardens are key assets for countries and for most major cities. In different parts of the world, a city without a botanic garden feels that it has not got some of the key assets that it needs for its cultural and scientific and conservation and relaxation resources. And of course, there has been a great movement to establish botanic gardens at local level to support community needs. We can celebrate in the botanic garden community the wonderful innovative role that the botanic gardens and BGCI played in the development of the global strategy for plant conservation. It is clear, and I think it's fair to say, that if this work had not been spearheaded by botanic gardens, that there would today probably not be a global strategy for plant conservation. It started with a resolution from the 16th Botanical Congress in St. Louis in 1999, when a resolution from the Congress called for plant conservation to be recognized as an urgent international priority. Now, we often have wonderful resolutions which then gather dust subsequently, but a follow-up meeting with 16 botanists held in Gran Canaria in Spain took that forward, that resolution, and developed the Gran Canaria Declaration, which called for the development of such a program for plant conservation, and presented it to the Biodiversity Convention in May 2000. And it was, in that way, it was incorporated into the Convention on Biological Diversity Processes, and the rest is history. The global strategy for plant conservation was updated, as we know, in 2011, with botanic gardens continuing to be recognized as playing a major role in its implementation. Indeed, when you look at each of the 16 targets, there were a range of stakeholders identified for each of those targets. And those of you at the back will not be able to read this, but the point that can be made is that 50% of the targets, botanic gardens are recognized as primary stakeholders in the delivery of those GSPC targets. And indeed, we know that most of the targets, if not all of the targets, botanic gardens can play a very significant role in achieving what has been set out for 2020. When I look, for example, at the plant conservation work of the Missouri Botanical Garden in relation to the GSPC, I'm pleased and satisfied that each one of the 16 targets, the garden is able to play a significant role in its achievement, both at home in the US and indeed around the world. And I'm sure that if many of you, if you haven't done so already, go through the 16 targets and you will be able to pick out achievements made by you in each of those 16 targets. There have been throughout the world a whole range of special initiatives, strategies and action plans prepared by botanic gardens linked to the global strategy for plant conservation, and we can celebrate that achievement too. I am slightly concerned that many of these action plans are getting old, have not been reviewed and updated, and perhaps are not driving action in a way that was intended. Preparing an action plan and putting it on a shelf doesn't achieve conservation. However, it is important to make sure that each one of our institutions knows what our part is in the broader scheme of things, and that's where these action plans play an important role. Of course, despite the fact that some regions don't have national or regional plans, we do have the international agenda for botanic gardens and conservation linked to the GSPC, and the GSPC itself provides that role for many of our own individual institutions. The Botanic Gardens also played a significant role in establishing and developing the Global Partnership for Plant Conservation. The Global Partnership for Plant Conservation was established in 2004 and grew directly out of the Gran Canaria Group to continue its support and guidance for the worldwide implementation of the GSPC, and indeed was recognized pretty uniquely by the convention as playing a role in monitoring and helping to implement the global strategy for plant conservation, giving us in Botanic Gardens for the first time a real seat at the table in intergovernmental negotiations on an important worldwide initiative such as the GSPC. When you look at the membership of the Global Partnership, you won't be able to read this, and I don't want you to try, but there are about 50 members of the partnership now who have committed themselves to supporting GSPC implementation. And 50% of them, about half, are from the Botanic Garden community, both individual institutions and network organizations. It is, from my point of view, very, very important that the partnership is by no means uniquely Botanic Gardens, because the GSPC is for everyone involved in plant conservation. It is not a Botanic Garden initiative, although we can play a huge role in achieving it, and we do so. In thinking about going forward, though, because we have a lot to celebrate, a lot of achievements made, there really are some grand challenges for us coming up, things that we will need to address, things that we will need to look at very urgently in terms of what are the future for Botanic Gardens to respond to the GSPC and to respond to environmental challenges around the world. I picked out 6 areas I wanted to talk about briefly. Yes, briefly is the right word. And say something about them, perhaps give you a few examples of work that's going on at the Missouri Botanical Garden to show how we are trying to address our part in achieving what I've called some of these grand challenges. They are that we need to link plant conservation and environmental protection to world priorities, and I'll say more about that. We have made remarkable achievements in plant conservation around the world, but we still need to raise our game to do more. We have worked together very effectively, but there are still many, many gaps in achieving practical plant conservation aspects, which we will need to do by working together more effectively. We have provided great leadership in sustainability and environmental education, but there is much more to do. We are now increasingly active in plant science and research, but the changing agenda for us in plant protection means that we need to focus more of our efforts into developing research programs, developing research capacity in many more botanic gardens, and then providing science-based solutions for conservation action. And finally, we need to sustain all of the botanic gardens that have been built over the recent decades, and to build on this achievement and ensure that many of these newer botanic gardens are strengthened and enabled to play their part in achieving the grand challenges we set for ourselves. If we look, for example, for a moment at linking plant conservation and environmental protection to world priorities, we really need to understand the need to make biodiversity conservation relevant to a broader community. We know that the causes of the loss of biodiversity are within the productive sectors. They're linked to our consumption patterns, to energy use. We know that the loss of biodiversity is driven by poverty and trade and the failure to internalize the costs of environmental degradation. Therefore, if we want to address the loss of biodiversity, we have to mainstream our work into to impact those indirect drivers, those economic, those demographic, those socio-political, those cultural and religious and science and technology drivers of the loss of biodiversity. If we simply address the direct drivers, habitat loss, climate change, invasive species, and so on, we will really not be able to influence and have a significant impact on some of the key drivers for losing biodiversity. And therefore, there is a need for us to work to ensure that biodiversity considerations are incorporated into economic thinking, into planning processes, into climate change strategies, into action on equality and livelihoods. If you look at many of the climate change strategies adopted and developed by countries around the world, you will rarely see a mention of a botanic garden. You will rarely see a mention of the important role of biodiversity, in that they focus on energy and risk management. But we have, with the influential role of many botanic gardens in many countries, we can increasingly influence policymakers in this field. And this aspect has been recognized within the global community. The biodiversity target for 2020 focuses on the need for resilient ecosystems, because biodiversity provides essential services. The 2020 target is needed to secure the planet's variety of life, but also contribute to human well-being and poverty eradication. Similar concerns are built into the Aichi targets and the strategic plan for biodiversity. The benefits of biodiversity are seen as essential to ecosystem services. I received a statement by Braulio Diaz, which he issued just last week on International Day for the Eradication of Poverty, and he stressed this point too. And I think it's worth reading what he said. He said, "Protecting biodiversity and a healthy planet and productive ecosystems with the full and effective participation of the poor is essential to achieve poverty eradication," a similar point that Baroness Walmsley made at the opening of this Congress. It is now widely recognized that the poor depend disproportionately on biodiversity, not only for subsistence needs and income, but also as insurance against risks such as the impact of climate change. Therefore, safeguarding biological and cultural diversity is essential to build socio-economic and ecological resilience to eradicate poverty and meet sustainable development objectives. If we don't approach the conservation of biodiversity within these terms, then we will fail. Just one short case study based on the work of the Missouri Botanical Garden in Madagascar. It is one of the poorest countries in the world, where 69% of the population lives below the poverty line. Every year, 1% of Madagascar's remaining forests are cleared. That is within the context also that Madagascar has more than 14,000 plant species. The Missouri Botanical Garden has been active in Madagascar for at least 25 years, focused in particular on exploration, on documenting the remarkable diversity of vascular plants in Madagascar. My map on this side, whatever that is, left-hand side, shows collecting localities for our staff in Madagascar over 10 years. However, it really became clear about 10 years ago that if that was the limit of our involvement in Madagascar, we would essentially be documenting the disappearance of a unique flora, and we had to adopt and develop based on the information we had gained, a new approach to our work in Madagascar, which was to become active in conservation of the very plants that we've been interested in documenting. That included working with a whole range of in-country and international partners to identify the important priority plant areas in Madagascar. 78 were identified. And many of those fall within the protected area system now in Madagascar. But we were particularly concerned that there were a whole series of important areas, some of them quite small, which fell outside the protected area system and were pretty much doomed to extinction, to clearance. And so we undertook to take over the management with local communities of 11 of those sites across Madagascar, working with local communities to find community-based solutions to conserving those forests and ecosystems for the future. They are not officially protected nature reserves by government. They are community collaborative projects managed with staff from the Missouri Botanical Garden active in each case. It can't be done unless there is full and active engagement from each of the local communities. And so a key factor in developing the management and conservation of those areas has been to build economic resilience, to help reduce poverty and in the local communities, and to ensure that the local communities gain benefit from those sites and from maintaining them as diverse as possible. We have training courses, we have plant sales, we have ways in which local people can earn income in a way that really is very inspiring to go there and see how they see that the short-term benefits of slash and burn clearing forest can be turned around, and they protect the forests instead for their long-term economic benefits. One of the sites is a little 30-hectare site called Ankaphobe Forest. You can see in my slide a couple of photographs of it. It's very, very small indeed. It would be gone but for the fact that each year we burn a double row of fire breaks around it to protect it. And now the forest is gradually spreading out, and we are restoring on those barren slopes native species from the little Ankaphobe forest to gradually expand to areas that have been lost through slash and burn agriculture. It's also become a refuge for brown lemurs, because they know they are protected there, and brown lemurs, as other areas are cleared, are moving in gradually into Ankaphobe forest. And this is providing income for local people who lead tourists to look at brown lemurs and to see this forest. And it is modest, the income. Annually, the local community is raising from this forest about $5,000, but that goes a long way in a small community in Madagascar. It also has the only known specimens of a critically endangered tree, Schizolina tampuketsana, which is now being propagated and grown in ex situ collections, planted in schools, in the Botanic Garden in Tananarivo, and replanted as part of restoration of Ankaphobe forest. The Missouri Botanical Gardens team in Madagascar is 99% Malagasy. We have one technical advisor who is non-Malagasy, but it's a wonderful team of about 150 people working for the garden doing this marvelous work. Second grand challenge in the time that's left I want to mention is to raise our game in plant conservation. 75% of threatened plant species in ex situ collections is the target 8 we have to achieve. We have made great progress in many regions. We know through the work of BGCI that 40% of European threatened plants are currently in ex situ collections. It's still a long way from 75%. In Australia, it's 57%, and in New Zealand, 55%, and in North America, 39%. And I've no doubt there are high percentages of threatened plants in cultivation in China, in Russia, and in other regions, but very low percentages in some other regions of high diversity. We have 7 years to address this and achieve this target, and we need to turn around our efforts and focus with new programs in many regions. In the United States, the Center for Plant Conservation has a national collection of 750 species with 39 participating institutions, and this provides a very useful model which may work in some countries. In others, different models will apply. So the challenge really for us in addressing ex situ conservation is that we need a better focused approach to ex situ conservation. With the development of more institutional ex situ programs, we need to collaborate through our networks and help coordinate the work we are doing individually and collectively, and identify and therefore fill the gaps that we have to achieve in the years ahead. And some of that will be done by better information management, sharing that between us, and working collaboratively and nationally and internationally to ensure that ex situ conservation can move forward more effectively in regions where progress has been slow. We can celebrate the fact that there are now good and strong seed banks in many botanic gardens around the world. And the Millennium Seed Bank Partnership, led by the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, certainly can be congratulated on what it's achieved already, but there is much more to do. Last year, we established a small seed bank for the Missouri Botanical Garden, and its first priority is to safeguard the eco-regional flora of the state of Missouri. Capturing adequate genetic diversity that we couldn't hope to capture if we brought it simply into cultivation. So too, as part of our conservation work, we can increase our role in ecological restoration and in management of in situ conservation. At the Missouri Botanical Garden, we have a wonderful 2,400-acre nature reserve, which is developing as a showcase for restoration of woodlands, wetlands, and prairies. A third grand challenge is that we need to work together more effectively. We have the wonderful plant search, which documents the fact that many endangered plant species are in cultivation in botanic gardens around the world. I worked in Mauritius in the early 1980s, and a plant that I bemoaned had disappeared forever was Dracaena umbraculifera. It went extinct in Mauritius about 150 years ago, but Plant Search says that it's in 18 botanic gardens. And so surely we have an opportunity to work to bring together the institutions that manage those surviving plants of an extinct in the wild species and restore it. An extreme example of rescuing a threatened species. We have 2 specimens of Dracaena umbraculifera growing in the climatron at the Missouri Botanical Garden. And just 2 weeks ago, I was in the Moscow Main Botanic Garden, and they have 2 specimens too. And they have a specimen here in Dunedin Botanic Garden. And so if we can locate all of the additional specimens in cultivation and do a DNA analysis of the surviving individuals, we have the opportunity to use, through the plant search, the surviving individuals to put together the surviving gene pool with the ultimate aim of propagating them and putting them back into the wild in Mauritius. And indeed, the government of Mauritius is very keen for us to do so. There are many, many other species that could be tackled in a similar way. A fourth grand challenge, and I am getting to the end, is to provide increasingly effective leadership in sustainability and environmental education. We need to live up to our rhetoric. We need to live up to the advice we're giving to others and communicate the importance of plants in a clear way. We receive 250 million visitors a year to our botanic gardens, so we have used that opportunity to spread coherent messages on the importance of plants. Education themes in botanic gardens have expanded hugely over the decades. We have most of our botanic gardens receive tens of thousands of children coming through our formal education programs. We are, most of us, putting in place issues and activities relating to sustainability, from recycling to sustainable buildings, to composting, to green teams, to making sure that we are living sustainably in our own operations. We are reaching out in our communities too, in our work around the world, to ensure that our education programs are active in other countries too. But in communicating the importance of plants, I believe we need to be more engaging, we need to be more accessible, we need to be more relevant. There was a student who came to me some years ago and said, I was thinking of studying botany, but I think I might do zoology instead. And I said, why? And she said, well, botany is boring really, isn't it? And I said, no, it isn't. Botany isn't boring. It's only botanists who are boring. One of the ways that I felt one can connect people with plants more effectively is by being relevant. And I've recently finished a book on ethnobotany of Irish plants, which will help to document a disappearing tradition of traditional knowledge and explain to people how we have survived using plants for so many purposes over the years. One of the most relevant and I hope engaging little projects I've been involved in as part of my Irish ethnobotany work was to help in the development of a new gin. This is a new distillery in the southwest of Ireland, and they came to me to help put together a recipe for a new gin, which is now commercially available. Joan Walmsley, in her presentation, talked about the importance of gin, and I'm entirely happy to agree with her. But this is, I know we laugh at it, but this is a way of making plants relevant, engaging, and realistic. And if you look at the back of my gin bottle, I can't show it to you here because I don't have a photograph. Each one of the 9 plant species, either collected from the wild or grown locally, are documented to show that this is an important botanical product. We need to push our boundaries in plant science, and I'm going to run through very quickly because I've run out of time. The Botanic Gardens are leading in the development of the World Flora Online on Target 1. That project was launched last year and is moving forward through the work of a new World Flora Online international consortium, and some of our institutions who are here today are involved in that. Finally, the last grand challenge I want to highlight is the need to sustain botanic gardens and build on the achievements we've had. Take for example, Brazil. In 1938, there were 3 botanic gardens, and over the years, they steadily built up with new botanic gardens, so that in 2013, there are now 36 botanic gardens in Brazil, scattered throughout much of the country. Not all of it, but much of it. They established a network for botanic gardens in 1991, which is doing wonderful work in linking them. They produced an action plan that outlines what each garden can do. But what are the great challenges they face here? There is no one from Brazil here at this meeting. They simply don't have the resources to come to a meeting like this and to be involved. There are only very isolated instances of botanic gardens in Brazil implementing their own action plan. They need sustained financial support to grow and build in the capacity they need for future work. In a country like Brazil, with 55,000 plant species, it has to be a global priority. And so if we are to deliver the GSPC through botanic gardens, we need to build capacity amongst ourselves and amongst our partners, addressing such areas as mission, vision, strategies, networks, strategic relationships, leadership, management, operations, resources, facilities, and so on. And it is the combination of each of these different aspects that will lead to success in achieving what we need to do within the GSPC. I believe there is also a need probably for us now to explore new approaches collectively to generating resources for botanic gardens around the world and not leave many of these newer, smaller botanic gardens to their own devices, because they simply will disappear if we don't support them. I like this final cartoon saying then we have global consensus on the need to conserve plants and their habitats. Now we come to targets and timeframes. Well, we have 7 years. We have pushed for the GSPC to be adopted and to be recognized, and for us to be recognized in playing our role. Now it's time, over the next 7 years, we need to refocus our efforts to achieve what we want to do, and so that we can be proud not only of our past achievements, but look forward optimistically to future successes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter, for a wonderful overview. And I'm going to take one quick question, because I think it'd be a real shame not to have at least the opportunity for somebody who's burning with a question. Chipper.
Peter, and several of us are working on smaller online floras. Is there an official way to link them to the consortium?
Yes, there is. First of all, many more institutions are welcome to join the World Flora Online Consortium. It is simply by signing a memorandum of understanding. And we hope to provide tools that will enable people with floras to upload them and make them available for the World Flora Online. But there's a meeting coming up in Edinburgh in a couple of weeks' time, and some of the plans and structures associated with how those floras can be combined into the World Flora Online will then become available.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Well, we've had 3 great presentations. We've had invitations to 3 great conferences. We've had a sneak preview of an interesting book that's coming out. We've had a really wonderful session this morning. And it just remains for me to tell you 2 things. First, that those of you who bid in the silent auction yesterday and got happily carried away can now, during this tea break, pay for and collect your prizes. And finally, I have gifts from Alan, which I'll present to our plenary speakers in a moment, and I'll just invite you to thank all 3 of them once again for their wonderful presentation.